America East Three-Pillar Academy. I'm down here in sunny Baltimore at UMBC, and I have the privilege of hanging out with Anne-Marie Guglieri from Colgate. Anne-Marie, how are you today?
I'm great, Jessica. Thanks for having me. It's not as sunny here, but very happy to be here.
Well, welcome. So a little bit about Anne-Marie, for those of you who haven't had the chance to connect with this rock star, to use Patty Phillips' phrase, rock star administrator. In 2014, you actually received the Nell Jackson Administrator of the Year Award from Women Leaders. So congratulations on that award. But it started way before you got to Colgate, back in playing field hockey at Syracuse.
Right,
And then,
yep.
Transitioned into some compliance work at Dartmouth, and you've been at Colgate for the past few years and being promoted and heavily utilized and overseeing the operations. And, you guys had some really big facility projects that you had the opportunity to oversee, $41 million in construction total, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to stop talking now, but for all of you out there in Twitter land, please feel free to join the conversation. Hashtag 3P Academy to the America East and join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you guys as you have questions come up during this conversation. So Anne-Marie, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. And as I said to everyone before, I really enjoy the three-pillar sort of Twitterverse that you all are doing. I've watched many of them. So really just am humbled and appreciate the opportunity. So today, to talk about managing up, like we've spoken about, I guess the first start is why it's important. And I truly believe that 99% of advancement is by doing this well. No matter what level you are or what level you eventually want to go to, you're going to be managing up, like it or not, for the rest of your life. So I think if you're not making this a priority, it's a sure way where you won't stand out next to your peers. So then once I think you understand why you have to do it, the most important thing is focusing on who you're managing up to, and who that person is, who that one up is right above you. And that may be the senior associate AD that you report to, the associate AD you report to. For my athletic director, it's the board of trustees and the president. For me, it's Vicki Chun, my athletic director here at Colgate, who actually was just took the athletic director job at Yale. So certainly congratulations is in order for her. But you can't be all things to all people, but you do need to be everything to the one person or that one layer above you. And whatever is important to them now suddenly becomes important to you if you really want to do well at managing up. So some things that I always think about in terms of managing up, I've really broken them up into sort of 4 buckets here, if you will. The first one that I always think about is it's not about you. I'm a really big believer in DISC assessment or the color test or whatever different personality tests that you use or others out there may have. And I love them so much because they identify what makes you tick, but most importantly, it's what makes your boss tick or your one up tick. And that is key. Another key point about this is to not be discouraged if you're one up or if your boss is not like you. So for those of you who know Vicki Chun, my current boss, we are so different. We could not be more different. For those of you who are really familiar with the DISC test, I am very much a D and she is an I. For the colors, I'm a green and she's a blue gold. But the point of managing up is not to be your boss or not to change your personality. You're valuable in it of yourself, for what you bring, what your perspective brings to the table. I had an old boss at another institution always tell me that when 2 people in the room always agree, you don't need one of them. So differences are okay. I think managing up is really about understanding and managing that personality above you as opposed to becoming that personality. The second thing is, that the phrase I always think about, if you need anything, let me know. If you said that to your boss, you're great. But you certainly can be better. Saying that is really nice, but it will never set you apart. What sets you apart is actually knowing what to take off their plate before they even know what it is. The person above you, the person that's your boss, is juggling a lot of different things, and they have to make decisions day in and day out. So don't give them one more decision to make. Help them figure that out. Just do it. I read a book several years ago. It's really stuck with me, by Lee Woodruff, who actually was a keynote speaker at Women Leaders. And she gives the example of when you have a really good friend or a colleague, whatever it may be, who's going through a crisis or a tough time, don't ask them what you can do. Just do it. Just make them dinner, pick up their kids at school, put their trash out for them, different things like that. Another example I always think about with this was when Vicki first became athletic director at Colgate, and that was 6 years ago. And just like any first athletic director who steps into that chair, you're sort of drinking out of a fire hose. And on her plate was we were starting construction on our new soccer and lacrosse complex. And for those of you, Jessica included, who's been a part of capital projects, it's a lot of detail work, a lot of meetings, a lot of long meetings, a lot of high tempers. And one of the things I had asked her early on is if I could attend those meetings with her. And she agreed. And we would sit through these meetings together. And then after the meetings, as opposed to saying to her, what can I do to help with follow-up, just do the follow-up. And that's the best thing you can do for them, is taking something over for them where they don't even know they need you to take it over for them yet. I think anyone can really be valuable, but your goal is to be indispensable. And I think if you're managing up appropriately, that's one way to do that. Sort of the third piece here is knowing what to ignore. I think is really, really important. As I mentioned before, the person above you has so many decisions to make and so much coming at them. If you are a trusted person in your athletic department, you likely have a lot of information coming at you too, which is great. But it doesn't always mean it should leave your desk and then go to their desk. Just because an issue is something that you're dealing with doesn't mean it's their issue. It works the reverse. Their issue can become your issue, but it shouldn't always be 360 where your issue becomes their issue. And I think one of the key things you really want to learn early on is differentiating between red flag, and then burning red flag. Every level above you, like I said, has a higher level of scrutiny. So you need to be thoughtful on things that you're actually raising to that level. There are certainly a lot of things day in and day out that do make it to Vicki's desk or your boss's desk, but you always want to accompany that with thought and also a solution. And then the last thing here, the fourth, if you will, is always be on their side. I think this cannot be overstated enough. I mentioned just before that every level above you is taking on a closer and higher level of scrutiny. And I think about when you're successfully managing up, there's some key phrases you just absolutely want to remove from your vocabulary. Phrases and thoughts such as, it was totally their decision. Or, I thought really hard to get that for you, but they just didn't do it. Or something like, it's not what I would have done. Or probably the one that drives me the most crazy is when someone says, that's above my pay grade. I think it's really, really important, if you want to be viewed on the inner circle or be a member of the inner circle, you can't think like an outsider, and you can't be perceived as if you are an outsider from people that are making the decisions and have sort of a direction that they want to take things in. So be really, really cognizant of always being on the side of your one up. So those are kind of the four pieces of things that I always try to think about day in and day out. And sort of in closing, if you will, is as your bosses change and you change in your levels too with managing up, what may have advanced you at one point in your career or at one school will certainly not get you to the next. Because again, bosses change, personalities change. So I think if you're nimble and sort of always keeping these things in your mind, that will certainly assist in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like, starting, as we talked about, you start off with Dartmouth, you're at Colgate, you definitely had some different people that you reported to. So you and Vicki are opposite. So what did it look like at Dartmouth, and what might have been some of the growing pains that you went through there?
Yeah, that's a really great question. When I was at Dartmouth, I had a terrific boss whose name was Drew Galbraith. He's now the athletic director at Trinity College. And that was the only time in my career where I mirrored him in terms of personality. We were most similar. And it was great One of the things I learned from that experience, though, is you have a blind spot then. So right now, in terms of Vicky and I, we are very different. So how I see something will not be how she sees it, and vice versa. Going to my Dartmouth example with Drew, we were very similar in how we saw things. So that can create a blind spot for you because typically you are agreeing about, how I see something is likely how he does, and vice versa. So as I said before, where differences, it's okay to have them. If you don't have them, that's okay too, but just really be cognizant of that.
And so how did you work through your similarities?
Both of us were always right. It was easy.
Right.
I think what I learned from him was how important it is to get other perspectives, and how important it is to know those who do have a similar thought process from you. And he taught me that in a variety of ways with coaches he's worked with or other staff that he was overseeing. He really taught me the value of being in a position where you really had to rely on getting different perspectives from people, because it was so important to really see the whole puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so for those of you who might have joined us late, I'm Jessica Hammond-Graff from UMBC, part of the America East, and you're tuning into the Three Pillar Academy. We have Anne-Marie Guglieri from Chief of Staff at Colgate, and we're talking about how to manage up. If you'd like to join the conversation, please feel free to join us at the America East and tweet 3P Academy. Love to hear from you guys and your thoughts about managing up. So you've moved up in the role, and you've built relationships. You've built relationships across, but how do you manage that your boss's boss? So I'm sure the president has called on you time to time, or board of trustees, and you're like, well, Vicky, I got to do this. So how do you manage that leapfrog, so to speak?
The way you put it, leapfrog, is perfectly said. I think that comes to knowing your boss's personality so well, and ensuring you're giving the right answer and the same answer. And so how would it look if Vicky's answer to our president was one thing and my answer was one of those phrases I just said? It was totally Vicky's decision. I never would have done it that way, or I have no idea why she did it that way. I think what's really important, and it also sticks, Jessica, to your point of being on their side, and always aligning yourself with them. It protects them, and also being cognizant of that's their boss. So just as much as we care about what our boss thinks of, they're thinking about that too. So I think it's really, really important to stay aligned in your responses and your answers. And you do that really well by watching your boss and watching what her philosophy is, how their decision-making process is. And again, always being on their side.
Mm-hmm. That's really great advice, because sometimes, that's the easy way out, to be like, oh, it wasn't me.
It was all them. Exactly.
Exactly. So how did you come to learn, what to take off their plate? Because when you start as a younger administrator, or, I'm an assistant coach and I'm trying to make these decisions, but I'm not really sure, like, how do you build that progression?
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest learning curves, and one of the hardest things I've noticed as I've progressed in my career. When I was in compliance, one of the best things is it's a checkbox, right? You answer questions this way, waivers are done this way. But then as you sort of go higher into your career, or out of a certain area, you start to learn that things are not as black and white. And I think when you start with this, always err on the side of telling them more. Always err on the side of over communicating until they finally say to you, you know what, you're good. You got that. It's all good. I think until you get that, though, always err on the side of telling them more, so they feel like they are truly in the loop to that.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point. If you're bringing solutions,
right,
you're going to be seen as more valuable than opposed to tell me what to do.
Exactly. Vicky always says this, that you're going to be remembered for either the problems you create or the problems you solve. Make sure you're remembered for the problems you solve. So it's just to your point.
Yeah, because who wants to be remembered for what you well, if it's good. If you created good problems.
Exactly. Exactly.
But that's hard to sometimes it's hard to do, to kind of understand your limits and where you are in your growth process and where to take those. I use a tree diagram, and sometimes you're making leaf decisions which are independent and don't have a lot of risk, or you're making trunk or root decisions which really impact the organization. And so if you find yourself in the middle of a root or a trunk decision, you need to bring in a lot of people. If you are in the middle of a leaf decision, then there's not many consequences. Waiting for it. All right. And just when you thought we were done, we are back live with Anne Marie. We got all the technical issues figured out, and I've convinced her to share with you the story of her Christmas party, and kind of how that came about when you have two people who are like-minded in their thinking. So Anne Marie, if you want to kind of share how that came about.
Yeah, no, certainly. And thanks everyone for staying with us through this, especially you, Jess. One of the stories that had happened to me at a few institutions that I was at a couple years ago, or many years ago now, but as I was saying, how differences can really be valuable to an organization. We were going through a period at the school that I was at where it was a really difficult semester. We had a staff member pass away. It just was a lot going on. And my boss had mentioned something about, you know what, with everything going on and all that is happening, I don't really think we need a holiday party. It's going to be a lot of extra energy, a lot of extra time, things of that nature. And I totally agreed with him. And what we were missing sort of the side that said, now more than ever, we need to bring people together. And because maybe we didn't need to be brought together just because of how our sort of DNA is, didn't mean others like that in our organization didn't need that at that time. So we always talk about why diversity is important, but diversity is so important too with the way you think, your personality traits, because it really does help you see every side of the square, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, like that was probably a moment where, you and your boss were like, no, we're good. But everybody else was like,
Totally.
We wanted to come together. And
exactly. And that's one of the things you have to really be careful on with always having people around you that always agree with you. We sort of always joke, right, in business where they say everyone wants a yes person. But the best leaders don't. They don't want someone who always says yes to them. And I think there's a lot of times too that you agree with the leader that you're working for, especially because you buy into them. There's so much about Vicky Chan that I am bought into, so much in so many different ways. So questioning people is not to say that you're not bought into them. It's just so you can actually, as an organization, really look at the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. While we had some downtime, I got an email saying somebody had a question. So Kathy, I'm calling you out. Shoot your question over to @AmericaEast #3P Academy to get your questions answered and join in the conversation. I know some of my other SWAs from the America East are joining in with us. So Anne Marie, how do you take this back? So you're leading others at this point. So what you know about managing up, how do you translate that to, a younger generation who might not have learned some of those skills, or how you're bringing them along?
Yeah, it's a great question. You never forget what it's like to have bosses, right? Just like I said before, you will be managing up for the rest of your life. I think when people think that when you become the AD, all of a sudden you're in charge and everything's great. Like I said, Vicky's managing up to the president, to the board of trustees. You're always managing up no matter what level you are at. So I think, as people are trying to manage up to you, it's just as important for you to manage down. I don't think that managing up is any more important than managing down or managing across. Some of the best things that I have gotten from my former bosses and current bosses is the opportunity to always take more on, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to ask questions, to be mentored. So I try to remember those things. But if you're just managing up, you're really missing an opportunity to help the rest of your organization grow with you. I'm a strong believer that you are as strong as your weakest link, and the goal is to have no weak links. And you are only doing that if you're managing down and across appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So managing across, like peer to peer is a little more challenging, right? Because neither of you probably maybe report to the same person, but don't report to each other. You just work together. So talk a little bit more about that peer to peer relationship.
Yeah. I think it's one of your most important relationships. Because I think of my counterpart here, Yuri Mir. He's a Colgate grad, and we recently took him from Princeton a few years ago. I'm laughing because everyone who knows Yuri and I will know that we're just as different as Vicky and I. So maybe I'm the outlier, actually. But Yuri and I are tremendously different. But I value his opinion so much. And the reason for that is because of just that. Because we are so different. When I see things, and I think it's the only way to see it, it's amazing to me how every time when I run it by him, he'll see it differently. We may come to the same solution, which we often do, but we've gotten there in a very, very different way. And I've learned as I progressed that speed is very important. People like timeliness, they like quick decisions. But at the end of the day, when you are rushing versus going quickly, those are two very different things. And I think when you start to manage across, becomes more of advice sharing than managing and overseeing and things like that. And I think when you can get into the mode of advice sharing and sharing your perspectives, it's helping both of you, because especially when you do have the same boss. At the end of the day, our goal is to both make Vicky have less off of her plate and put her in the best position to have all of Colgate succeed. So I really can value the peer-to-peer, but I agree with you. It is hard because everyone does love organizational charts for a reason. You know exactly how to act, but when it's sort of straight line, you're a little bit unsure about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you mentioned this, you have to be comfortable with asking and being vulnerable. Like, hey, tell me more about this, or how do you see me when I'm doing my best, or how do you see me, where are ways that I can help you be better, and really opening yourself and being vulnerable to some of those situations to ask those questions, whether it's up, whether it's side, or whether it's down even.
Exactly. And I think the best pieces of advice you can get are from the people that you are doing it to, the people that you are overseeing. And whether they feel like that they're giving you advice or not, oftentimes on their reactions alone, if you really are looking at yourself and you want to be a better you really can take some of their answers and apply it to yourself and think of why they are doing that, or maybe why they're not coming to you as often as you think or you would like, or things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. But it starts with trust and your willingness to be vulnerable, which can be hard. You're opening yourself up to criticism and praise, and can really, if you don't trust the person that you're chatting with, then that can, be hurtful at times, and you're kind of giving yourself to them, and hopefully they're going to kind in return.
Exactly. And I think the best relationships too are the give and take. No one likes to be on either side of a one-sided relationship, whether it's you giving or whether it's you always taking and they're not giving you anything in return. So I think, as you identify people in your organization, whether it's big or small, you really can get a sense of that, of trying to get with folks who have different perspectives than you. But if they're being vulnerable to you, to give them something back too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really liked your phrase, am I rushing or am I working fast? Because knowing that you're a high D, which I'm not surprised to hear you, I'm a high S. And so, I'm already thinking like, oh, fast, huh? Okay, well, and as a high S, I know I would have to come in and change, my interactions and how we would work together should we be in the same space, because that's not, your fast might be like to me, and be like, hurry up a little bit now.
Exactly. It's so funny you bring up your personality type, because one of the things that Vicki had done for us as an organization earlier this semester was we did the DISC assessment for everyone in our organization. And managers did it for those they supervise, and head coaches did it for their assistants. And again, the reason I am somewhat obsessed with these personality tests is because I know exactly what I am. I scored the same thing on every test: Myers-Briggs, DISC, color. I mean, I dare someone to give me a personality test where I'm even going to stray a little bit. It won't happen. But with that said, what is so valuable to me is I have an index card that I keep right here on my desk. And I'm not going to move anything in case we lose each other again. But I have an index card that I keep on my desk that has the letter, you're an S, I'm a D, Vicki's an I, of every person at Colgate that in the athletic department. And it really helps me remind myself when I go into meetings with that person. And S is a great example. When I go into meetings with S, again, I'm not changing myself, but it is important to take some reminders of how they are going to hear what you are presenting to them. And particularly when it's in your best interest for them to retain as much of feedback as you are giving them. So that index card has helped me personally tremendously in terms of just understanding what makes other people tick. That's not just the person above you, it's sort of everywhere with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we have one question that came through for you. How can you begin managing up when starting a new job?
Great question. I think you start right away. And I think you have to. But I also think that as scary as it may be when you don't know your boss, I'm still learning today, and I've worked directly under Vicki for 6 years now. I think I have a really great handle on her and what makes her go and what doesn't make her go. But I'm still learning today because as a leader, she's changing and she's evolving, and every good leader does that. But I think when you're starting a new job, one of the first things you want to get right is that you are managing up to the right person. So I do go back to finding out who that one person is or what that one layer is, because I am a believer that albeit you have to manage up to some degree to everyone that's above you, it really is important who you are directly reporting to. You have to do your best to be everything you can to that person, and not really be a jack of all trades to everybody, but really focus on that person. So that'd be my first suggestion, is finding out who your who is, who your number one is. And then second, I would, from your first few emails from that person and your first few meetings, you're going to get a really good sense of who that person is. I mean, Jessica, you just said that you were unsurprised that I'm a D, and we've talked for 35 minutes here. So I think some of those first interactions will really tell you quite a bit about that person.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. So Anne Marie, do you have any parting words to share with everybody who's tuned in today?
Not at all. I think this was great. I really appreciated the time. I probably would just end with what I said before about being remembered for the problems you create or the problems you solve, and pick carefully which one you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking time this afternoon to join us. We really appreciated your insight about managing up and how to help all of us, not just our younger administrators, myself included, to really balance and help your department grow and work together as a team. So thank you very much for your time. Hope to see you around here shortly, and best of luck with everything.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Take care.